there's a lot that we need to do in terms of structural reform so that our judicial systems are actually serving survivors. I'd say right now, unfortunately, even though there's some good new efforts, we're really failing people.
Back on Closer Look on this Tuesday, the 20th day of January. Well, dare I say it, can open, worms everywhere, following last night's epic episode.
Yeah, a lot of reaction to that episode. Yeah.
I'm blown away.
I thought it was a very reasonable conversation about
apparently you and I and Derek are in the minority.
There were a lot of people saying that we were fear mongering yesterday. Yeah. I completely disagree with that.
Yes. And let's tell everybody why we disagree with that.
Yeah. Well, first of all, we've seen the things that President Trump is doing with Greenland.
Yes.
And it is a discussion that's happening across the country from experts far smarter than you and I, talking about the many issues this raises for Canada. Whether they, for one, are we going to send troops to Greenland in support of our NATO allies there? How do we respond to Donald Trump on this? This is also a president who, I think today's his 1-year anniversary of his inauguration.
It is, yes.
Has spent a lot of that year talking about his desire to see Canada become the 51st state. So now that we hear him using rhetoric like, I'm going to take Greenland one way or the other, you start to wonder if that kind of thing could apply here. People much smarter than us are talking about it. Michael Ignatieff wrote about it in The Walrus the other day, former Liberal leader.
Right.
Just want to repeat his quote. Canada and Mexico will watch what happened in Venezuela, which is another example of some things that Trump's been doing, and begin thinking the unthinkable. What if they have to defend themselves not against Russia and China, but against their next-door neighbor? A lot of other experts are talking about this. Adam Gordon is a person who advised the Minister of Foreign Affairs, his senior legal and policy advisor to the minister. So behind the scenes, talking to the minister about all the different tentacles of these big issues and sort of what happens when you make one decision over another. We have a chance to talk to him. And this is also a person who co-authored a column in the national newspaper in the Globe and Mail saying we need to start preparing for this possibility. He's not saying, and we're not saying that this is inevitable, this is happening. This is a possibility. And then what happens when we wake up this morning?
We wake up this morning.
What's the line story in the Globe?
To the Globe and Mail, take these off so I can see, exclusive. The first thing on their website, military models Canadian response to hypothetical American invasion.
Absolutely.
And so the Canadian military is thinking about this.
That's right. So it's not just Closer Look that's thinking about it.
It is not just us.
And I think it's clear, the article's clear, and our interview with Adam Gordon was very clear. No one's saying this is inevitable. This is probably very unlikely this is going to happen.
For sure.
But it would be irresponsible as a government. The government would be irresponsible to not even be thinking about this. That's not something.
And this from Adam, a guy who had a seat at the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. He's been a part of these discussions.
He's there, so he would know what kind of discussions are happening behind closed doors.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the anniversary of Trump's inauguration. I think it was Derek who mentioned
I think you said chump.
Did I? Well, yeah, look, if the shoe fits.
That's your words.
Derek mentioned that Trump posted, what was it, an image of a map?
Yeah, an AI-generated map.
An AI-generated map that had an American flag over Canada.
Over the whole, all the Americas, right, including Canada. So again, it's late at night. He's posting on Truth Social, things like that. But we're fear-mongering.
Yeah.
For the record, nobody's saying that American forces are coming over the border tomorrow. No one's talking about that.
No.
But we are talking about on this show the things that people are talking about. And there are many experts in the country saying that this is something that needs to happen, that needs to be being done. And so we had a conversation about it. It was a great conversation. You take from it what you must.
That's right.
That's what I would say.
And continue to hide behind your keyboard if you must.
That's right. And I have no doubt we're going to be talking more about this. I mean, every day it's as the Prime Minister said, it's an escalating situation.
Yes.
Who knows? I hope cooler heads prevail. That's always what we do. Because again, I still keep coming back to this idea. It's as Adam talked about how, if you take lessons from history, things inevitably change. Everything changes. But to see the relationship between America and Canada the way it is now is still, to me, it's mind-blowing, and it's unthinkable that we're at this point now where, we're talking about, the fact that we're not friends. We're not friends. And then Carney said it again today, what he said when he sat down on our podcast last year, that it's changed for good. It's not going back to the old way. And so this is where we stand, Scott.
And we do mention the Prime Minister because we are liberal-funded media, as so many people like to point out. But again—
sarcasm, of course.
Sarcasm, of course, yes. very sarcastic. I'm in one of those moods.
Yes, I can tell.
I have been all day. Couldn't wait to get in here tonight.
I know. I could tell. You're just kind of looking at staring in the door.
I was.
Nobody was here.
Let's story of my life. Let's move along to human trafficking in tonight's episode.
Yes, Scott, we're going to talk about human trafficking tonight. We're actually going to revisit an episode we did before Christmas. There was a lot of new statistics that came out about human trafficking in Canada, and we interviewed Julia Drydick. She's with the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. And this organization also runs a call center for victims or families who can call, and they do wonderful work behind the scenes that we don't ever get to see. And human trafficking is in the news all the time. If you Google it right now, for example, there's tons of news stories across Ontario. There's a big trial in Barrie regarding an alleged human trafficker. There's been some big high-profile arrests in Toronto and Halton regions. And then I don't know if you saw, but there was also a major bust in the summer. An Oakville sushi restaurant.
Right.
2 employees were accused of trafficking in multiple workers from Mexico. They were living in terrible conditions, allegedly, and 2 people were charged. And the restaurant was back in the news this week. Our team at Oakville News wrote about the fact that because of the alleged bad behavior that went on in this restaurant, the liquor licensing folks pulled their liquor license, right? Because you have
and
to
now they want it back.
You have to be an upstanding operation, right? And so they fought to get it back, and basically the tribunal said, no, we're not giving it back to you, and they're still denying. The ownership is saying they had nothing to do with what happened there, so they shouldn't be punished. But the liquor license. So if you go to, I think it's called August 8th restaurant in Oakville. If you want to get some sushi, you can't have a beer with your sushi because of that. But the human trafficking issue is one that continues to come on our radar in Ontario. And we sat down with Julie and talked in detail about the data that they're seeing, the statistics they're seeing, why it's on the rise, but also why there's some reason for hope.
Before we get into the specifics, Julia, tell us a bit about your organization and its mission.
Yeah, so the center was founded in 2016 with what I'm told is the incredibly bold mandate of actually ending all forms of human trafficking in Canada. So while most people are becoming more familiar with sex trafficking, we're also finding that labor trafficking is far too prevalent across Canada. So we do this in a couple different ways. One is in operating the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline, and that's the source of some of the data of the most recent report we did. But we also do education, awareness, convening, knowledge building, advocacy, and public policy work.
All right. Thank you for that explanation. Okay, your organization recently released some data that I want to talk about. But before we do, let's talk about the StatsCan numbers that were reported this week. They looked at human trafficking data from 2014 to 2024 nationally and found during that 10-year span there were over 5,000 incidents reported by police. I assume that number did not surprise you?
No, and that's only really the tip of the iceberg. Interestingly enough, the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline is actually identifying a similar number of survivors every year when you look at all police reported data. But less than 10% of those people contacting the hotline are actually in a place of readiness to engage with law enforcement. So we actually feel like those numbers add to each other and that there's probably not a lot of duplication in what it is that we're identifying.
That's a great point. In terms of the national average, Ontario was quite higher than the national average at 2.3 incidents per 100,000. Can you speak a little bit to why in Ontario it's a little more prevalent or a lot more prevalent than in other places?
There's a whole bunch of factors behind that. And part of it is that Ontario just has the highest population density when it comes to other provinces. So we know that trafficking, and especially sex trafficking, is about profit. And it's about connecting to those commercial sex markets. And basically where you've got a city or an urban center, you've got a commercial sex market. But we've also seen the highest per capita investments in human trafficking awareness, prevention, and detection in Ontario compared to any other province. So they really are setting the standard in terms of prioritizing it, making sure there's a robust strategy in place, and putting dollars behind, again, that awareness and education. Because I think one of the biggest problems we have right now is just how little people know about human trafficking. So if you don't know what to look for, you're never going to see it, even if it's right in front of you.
It's a great point. Help us understand that. People have their assumptions about what human trafficking is. What is it? How does it happen? How do so many people fall victim to it?
Unlike what you see in the movies, human trafficking rarely involves kidnapping or smuggling across borders. When it comes to sex trafficking in Canada, overwhelmingly, survivors are Canadian women and girls. And it looks far more like intimate partner violence than kidnapping or abduction. Labor trafficking, on the other hand, manifests very differently. So we're seeing that it's kind of endemic to our temporary foreign worker system. And while migrants are coming here legally on legal work visas, because they're tied to one employer, have access to fewer labor rights and other access to services, we're finding that that's laying the foundation for this kind of systematic abuse and exploitation.
Julia, who's doing the trafficking? Is it organized crime? Is it one-offs? What's the story?
That's a great question. And I think when I did research on human trafficking corridors in Canada in 2019 and 2020, and we know that there's a relationship with organized crime, but it's not manifesting in the same kind of hierarchy of organized crime, which makes it even harder to detect. So traffickers are often positioning themselves as a boyfriend, a friend, someone that the victim actually knows, loves, and trusts. And they're finding different ways to launder the money, usually more individually, also sometimes putting debts and other expenses in the name of the victim to avoid detection. So we know there's a link there. We know that traffickers often have a relationship with organized crime, but we're not necessarily seeing human trafficking as a business model operating through the more kind of traditional organized crime methods.
It's a great. I appreciate you pointing that out, because a lot of people they assume a lot of things about this topic, but one thing they would assume or they would not assume is that it can begin with a regular relationship. This could be your boyfriend, it could be someone a close relative, and then all of a sudden you go down that pit. Is that accurate?
That is the vast majority of what we see in operating the hotline. And the Stats Can data also speaks to this, that I think it's over 30% of police identified victims. The trafficker is someone that's positioned as an intimate partner, but it's also a family member, a friend.
Yes.
It's kind of a grooming process.
It is. Traffickers are systematic and looking for people with vulnerabilities in their lives. And that could really be anything. So it can mean something as common as low self-esteem, problems in your peer group, problems at home. But they're also intentionally looking for folks who might be living in poverty, experiencing housing insecurity. Maybe they've got mental health or addictions issues. And so they hone in on that. And there's usually a period of love bombing. So they find out someone's greatest dreams and aspirations, but also their biggest fears. They will shower them with everything they've ever wanted and really kind of sell them a future and a world together that they never thought they would get. But then they quickly start kind of pulling that back, while also pushing their sexual boundaries and grooming them into the commercial sex industry. So there's a real gross use of emotional control, deceit, and coercion. So they're trying to get the survivors to actually think that they consented to something that they didn't. And that's part of what's used to keep folks entrapped.
What's amazing to hear amidst all that, the way you describe it, is that there's this wonderful hotline that you guys operate where people have this resource that they can call. And then, like you said in your latest data, over 5,100 calls last year to this hotline. It's an amazing thing. I can imagine just watching those people work and listening to their stories and listening to what happened just must be a very powerful thing to witness.
It's hard doing this work. It's a lot of hard work, and we're kind of dealing with some of the most gross experiences of people being horrible people. But I have to say that my team is what drives me to do this work, and just their commitment, their passion, their resilience, and them creating the space also for survivors to take those steps for themselves. We often say we can't save survivors. Survivors are saving themselves. We're just there to give them access to the support and resources that they need to take on that journey.
And I assume that journey can be long sometimes, maybe multiple calls to the hotline. What kind of steps do you do to help someone who wants to try to break free of this?
So it really depends case by case. whenever you call the hotline, and anyone can call, it doesn't have to be an emergency situation. It could also just be to talk through a situation. But we do a safety assessment at the beginning. So we assess whether or not they're safe. And if they aren't safe, then we work with them in a safety plan. So that could be either getting physically out of the situation they're in. It could be connecting with law enforcement or with another service provider. But we have partnerships with over 1,000 frontline service delivery partners across the country, as well as 99 specialized law enforcement units. So while the world isn't perfect, there's not services available in every community. We do our very best to make sure that people get the support they need when they want it, no matter where they are.
Julia, some people say, you know what, this doesn't concern me. Human trafficking doesn't impact me. What do you say to those people?
It might not. And you know what? I would love a world where it doesn't impact anyone. But unfortunately, the more education and awareness we do, the more disclosures that come forward. And we hear this across the board. So Ontario has also mandated some level of human trafficking awareness in all public school boards. We hear this from training providers and other folks that are raising awareness. It is rare that you go and do an information session and not get an actual disclosure of someone who's either being trafficked or groomed or another type of just really dangerous or unhealthy relationship.
When you do talk about awareness, if someone's listening to this show today, maybe a teenager's listening to this show, what should they be looking for among their peer group or signs of friends or family?
And this is a great question because we actually think that peers are some of the greatest tools to be part of change. If something's going on with a young person, it's actually probably not the parents that are going to know first. It's their best friends. So usually there's someone new in their life. So it might be a new boyfriend or a love interest. It might also be a new group of friends. And you're going to see them withdrawing from their normal social circles. It's never just one sign, but again, it lines up with signs of an unhealthy relationship. So if someone is new in their life, they're showing a lot of control. They might be providing canned answers, not being really honest about where they're going, what they're doing, maybe not showing up to school or events as much. They might also have really expensive new things that just don't add up when it comes to their income sources. And then, unfortunately, you're also seeing other signs of abuse. So cuts and bruises. Again, it really does line up with intimate partner violence. I think one of the additional challenges we see, though, is that there's so much stigma when it comes to engagement with the commercial sex industry. So in our research on human trafficking corridors, I asked service providers, what are some of the biggest challenges for people getting help? And they said stigma. Stigma was the number one thing that kept them from reaching out for support. And that's being used by traffickers too. They're leveraging that to keep them isolated and telling them things like, no one will ever love you again. Who's going to trust you?
Julia, let's talk political involvement for a sec if we can. If any politicians are listening or watching tonight, what more needs to be done? What's your message to them?
So at a federal level, I think everyone in the anti-human trafficking sector is waiting on bated breath for the renewal of the federal anti-human trafficking strategy. And we'd like to see that be more intentional around prevention. But we also at the provincial level need to make sure that every province has an anti-human trafficking strategy in place that will be renewed in perpetuity until we achieve our mission of eradicating human trafficking. And it's actually well-resourced. We can't just do this off the side of our desks. We need to make sure there's intentional resources available across the social services sector. And we see this too. Traffickers are really good at avoiding detection. And so if there's an area where there aren't targeted investments around education awareness, where there aren't intentional law enforcement units, they go to those places where they're not going to be detected so they can, avoid any trouble.
I do want to go back into some of the details of the previous reports, and we appreciate again all your time, Julia. What struck me too, StatsCan lists the cities that had the most police reported incidents, and I think Guelph topped the list in Ontario. Would that be because it's more rampant in Guelph, or because the people are reporting it more to police?
It lines up also with our data, just in terms of we are also seeing that small rural communities and hamlets are reaching out to us. And the total number is lower, but when you look at it in relation to the population density, it's actually an overrepresentation. Again, we're also seeing significant investments in anti-trafficking work in Ontario, and Ontario is one of the few provincial jurisdictions that have interjurisdictional law enforcement units that actually communicate, collaborate, share case data, so that when traffickers leave a municipal area, they're not having to start from scratch in terms of their investigations. But we also know that the 401 corridor is a major human trafficking corridor across Canada. The traffickers are systematically kind of going, even starting as much as in Montreal, and then going city to city across the 401, even up until Windsor, kind of tapping into those commercial sex markets, but also avoiding law enforcement detection and keeping victims isolated and dependent on them.
I think we touched on this a little bit before, but is it somewhat of a good news story that we're seeing the more police reported case? We're seeing even the fact that more people are calling your hotline means the awareness is out there. Is that accurate to say?
I think so. And it sounds weird talking about it like a good news story, but unfortunately, this has been going on for decades. And folks doing this work have been seeing it for decades. Trends change here and there, but I really do think that the increase in numbers is a reflection of the power of education and awareness. And I think our theory of change is we need to get to a point of saturation where 90% of Canadians actually know what human trafficking is. Then we're going to understand what the baseline is, and then we can start figuring out what works to get those numbers down until eventually there is no more human trafficking in Canada.
And from a prosecution perspective, I'm assuming it's very difficult to prosecute cases. For one, they're not reported very often, but when they are reported, it's quite the process to do that. Is that why we just don't see a lot of prosecutions?
It's really challenging with our criminal code definition on human trafficking because it's almost entirely reliant on victim testimony, and it's an incredibly re-traumatizing and challenging experience. We also know that the average length of a trial is over twice that of any other major violent crime. And we're also seeing just really low prosecution rates. And so for good reasons, survivors are often saying, this is not in my best interest to keep going. And we're seeing this also in terms of charges around sexual assault and sexual-based violence. The Ombudsperson for Victims of Crime came out with a report recently talking about how reforms to the Jordan Principle would make a really big difference in being able to execute better access to justice for survivors. So I think there's a lot that we need to do in terms of structural reform so that our judicial systems are actually serving survivors. I'd say right now, unfortunately, even though there's some good new efforts, we're really failing people.
Important conversation tonight, Julie. Anything that we didn't cover that we should have? Just
for the listeners, if something feels off in your gut or if you want to know more, please don't hesitate to call the Canadian Human Trafficking Hotline at 1-833-900-1010. The prevention calls are just as important as also responding to people in these horrible situations.
All right, and we will flash that number on the screen and put it in the write-up so people have it handy. There's Julia Drydick, the Executive Director of the Canadian Centre to End Human Trafficking. Julia, good to see you. We appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, our thanks to Julie for coming on the show. I believe it was back in December. Obviously a very important topic, and we'll continue to follow. And that's it for us tonight. I think in the 20 minutes or so that we've been here, we've got another 50 comments.
Yes, yeah.
On the potential invasion.
Yes, and there's been no military action yet.
None.
By the United States.
None.
If you didn't watch that episode, go back and listen to Adam and listen to the whole interview. It's more than 30 minutes, I think.
Yes.
And it was fascinating stuff. And again, we need to have these kind of conversations to understand what's happening in the world. No one's pushing for anything. No one's saying it's inevitable. Well, we want to have these conversations. You can find them here.
Watch the conversation with Adam. You're right. Then go read the article that was in the Globe this morning.
Read Adam's column
and read Adam's
and do some Googling of your own.
Yeah. All right, good stuff. Closer Look at villagemedia.ca and closerlookpodcast.ca is where you will find us online, including every single back episode of the show. Feel free to sign up and subscribe.
Someone just signed up.
The comments,
the sign-ups are coming in.
This is going to go on all night long. Closerlookpodcast.ca. For Derek Turner, executive producer of this evening's show, and Michael Friscolanti, our editor-in-chief. I'm Scott Sexsmith. Thanks for watching. See you tomorrow night, 7 o'clock, right here on Closer Look.
Frisco and Scott's wardrobe provided in part by Moores, Sault Ste. Marie.